Welcome in to another episode of the My Two Bits Gators Football Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Ben, and joined as always by the other host with us here, Mr. Randy. How are we feeling tonight, Randy?
B, what's going on, bud? All is well in the land, just trying to thaw out. So in the process of still thawing out after a frigid weekend where in my neck of the woods, just west of Gainesville, we touched down about 28 degrees Saturday morning. So yay.
Wow, dang, it got cold there. It didn't get that cold by me.
Yes,
I
sir.
think we did touch, I don't know if we even touched the 30s actually. So big temp swing there. Hope you covered up all your plants and
Yes.
all is okay up there. Good deal. I'm actually down in Southwest Florida at the moment as my tour of the state is as always continues. So
Yeah.
it's quite a bit warmer down here right now. But anyway, with that being said, let's kick this thing off and get it going. So tonight's episode is going to revolve around a discussion and analysis of the identity of Florida football. So we kind of talked about this or alluded to it a little bit. We really want to get into a little bit of the history of what Gator football really has been, because I think that when both you and I talked about this and discussed it, when we kind of thought back and looked at, okay, what do we think Florida football is, and what do we think the history really is, and the providence of the program, if you will. It kind of surprised us when we looked back and looked at what it
Yeah.
actually is versus what it was. And not that it's poor or something, but just maybe it's not as excellent as we might have thought, right? And I think that's relevant to some of the conversation we're going to have. So anyway, with that, let me do as always our intro here. Let's talk mission, our vision, and our agenda. So our mission, of course, is to provide factual analysis of all things Florida Gator football. And this is definitely a little unorthodox as we do that, and we'll be looking at some different aspects, right? Not so much around what's on the field now, but what was on the field then. So as it relates to our vision, we have unfiltered conversation around the product on the field, as well as recruiting and overall coaching decisions. Our analysis will be based on review of film, and while we will express opinion, that opinion should always be based in some form of fact. We will also evaluate strategy and tactics, as well as observation of player personnel decisions and on the field execution. So, for our agenda tonight, we are going to discuss what makes Florida a historically good, not great, good football program, because that I think is the correct adjective in this case. And I know I might be upsetting some people when I say that, but I think you'll find that the stats bear that out. Um, we also want to look at what does success look like for the fall of 24 based on not only our history, but also some other headwinds that are going to be involved there. We're then going to take a look at why does a transfer or recruit want to come, or recruit or transfer want to come play at Florida today, right? What is the motivation now as opposed to what it might have once been in a different time or place? Well, not place, but a different time or place in history, perhaps. And then we're going to wrap it up and sign it off. And while that's only a couple of agenda topics, we have quite a few things we want to get to under each. So I think we'll have a really good conversation around some of these things and where they might go. So, with that, let's get started here and discuss what makes Florida a historically good football program. And again, I don't mean that to be blasphemous. So, I think it's important to note that we really are not historically great, despite where the perception might be that because of some stretches that we've had throughout history, right? The 90s, the late 2000s, right? There is this perhaps perception that we are really this historically great football program, and we're really not. And we'll have some conversation around that. So I'm gonna turn it over to you and kind of let you get this started. Uh, Give me some thoughts, give me some stats that we pulled, and some things around that nature, and let's talk through this a little bit.
You know, I tell you what, B, the best part about this pod for me is therapy. And
Yeah.
as I look at the different things that we've discussed regarding constructing the agenda for this pod, you kind of said it earlier, but it's really interesting to see some of the origin stories, to see some of the things that has occurred throughout the history. And you know what, outside of what happened with Spurrier winning the Heisman years ago and a couple players here and there, and it almost seems like this program, although it's been around for a long, long time, right? Florida football, for those of you who might not know, has been around since 1911.
Yep.
And in its inaugural season, we actually went undefeated 5-0-1, which is remarkable. But here's the thing, Florida football, when you look at identity, whatever you want to call it, the unique thing is it was this specific period of time between 1990 and 2001, and just what seemed like 2005 to 2010.
Yep.
And one of the things I know, I thought, you said you like the quote, but it's a little bit different for another school, to the northwest of us. But we have a visor, right? We don't have houndstooth. That was the thing.
Right.
That was what made, I think, put Florida on the map in such a big way, because you had an introduction of this guy who had this idea of slinging this pigskin around, and took him from a program at Duke. He was only at Duke for 3 years, to come to Florida to obviously do what he did from 90 to 2001. So that was the other thing that was interesting to me in looking back at this history of Florida football, is it really can be defined in these little stretches compared to what the origination of Florida football as it dates back to 1911.
Mm-hmm.
So huge difference.
No, it is. It is. And it is really interesting. And I love that quote that you had there with the visor and not a houndstooth. And for those that don't get the reference there, Bear Bryant always wore a houndstooth cap. So just in case you didn't know that one, but that's the reference, right? So if you look at Alabama, and as much as we are not Alabama fans, that program is historically great. There's nothing you can do about it. Hopefully they're a little less historically great now without Saban. Fingers crossed, right? But historically speaking, they are great. I mean, there's really no two ways about it. You look at the number of wins, you look at the number of national titles, right? You look at all kinds of things, and they are historically great. And there are a few others that are in a similar category. I mean, they kind of stand above really most of the rest. But overall, there are a few others that are kind of in a similar category that could kind of rank up there in that neighborhood. But at the end of the day, we just aren't in the same category. We just aren't. And that may hurt, that may sting, but at the end of the day, it's the fact, right? So one of the things we kind of looked at with this is, okay, modern college football, right, when the AP polls started kind of coming into play and ranking out national champions and ranking out teams in general, came into play in the late 30s, right? So we kind of took, okay, 1940 on, what does that look like for us, right? So if you look at 1940 to current day or end of current season, we had 598 wins in that time period over 83 years. That's an average of 7.21 wins per year. I'll pause for effect there. 7 wins a year. It's really what that boils down to. Now, in fairness, it wasn't until like the 70s, maybe even early 80s, depending on the year, and how things went with bowl games and stuff like that, that we really got into, like a 12-game season. So it was harder to get to that number. So I'll give you, there were some, like 10 or 11 game seasons back then. So when you look back that far, that does factor in a little bit, but that's still not anything, epic. Right. We're not talking about great seasons as an average here over and over and over again, historically, or something like that. What's more interesting is when you look at just 40 to 89, right? So when you look at those seasons before Spurrier, right, we had 290 wins over 40 years. That's only 5.8 wins per year. And if you take out the 2 winless seasons, that's right, 2 0-win seasons we had in there, that's still only 6 wins per season over that time period. So now, you really kind of see, okay, it was the 90s that are kind of bringing that average up, right? And it's true, because when you look at 1990 to 2023, it's 308 wins over 33 years. That's 9.33 wins per year. So now you see that's actually what's bringing that average higher, right? So even though, yes, there were less games in those days, and okay, you were averaging 7 wins, well, not really, because really in that time period where there were less games, you're really only averaging 6, right? So really what it comes down to is we're about a game above 500 historically, right? The one exception to that is technically these last 30 years with 12 game seasons, we've been a 9-win team historically. That is true. That is true in these last 30 years. However, that's been helped along significantly by those chunks in the 90s and those late 2000s. You take those out and you put it more in line with what the rest of the years look like, and we're right back to that kind of 7, mid-7, maybe pushing on 8 because we had some other good years, but we didn't do that math, so I'm guesstimating there in fairness. But I mean, that's really what it looks like, and that's just an interesting thing, right? When you examine it and you look at it, and it's important to keep in mind, right? Because historically, we are not a juggernaut. We're just not. You know, we're a solid, good program that has had success at times, had great success at times.
Yeah.
But it's certainly not something where that's the standard. I think that's really important to keep in perspective.
Yeah, great points all across the board. I looked at the most winningest. Let me rephrase that. Yes, the most winningest we know is Michigan. Fine, whatever. It is what it is. But also the schools that have the most chips, right? And I think this list might surprise a lot of people. I'm gonna start in the 10 spot. Okay, Minnesota, 6 championships. 6. But their last one coming in 1960. Number 9, Oklahoma, 7 championships. Their last coming in 2000. And their last in 2000, they had a 15-year gap between their last two, 1985 and 2000.
Mm-hmm.
Tied for 8, Ohio State with 8 chips. Okay, and their last two, 2002, 2014. Tied 8 with Ohio State with 8, Harvard. But again, a little skewed. Their last chip, 1919.
Right. That's pre AP stuff, so that gets a little dicey.
Exactly. Tied 6, USC, Southern California, 9 chips. Their last two coming in 2003, 2004. There might have been some controversy around those. I don't remember. Tied at 6.
Wouldn't be today, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Tied at 6, right? We got Michigan, right? Most wins in college football history. We know that. Outside of their last chip, of course, that just came less than a month ago, whatever. Yeah, less than a month ago. 1997. So you had that. Notre Dame, 4th spot, 13 chips. Their last 2 chips, 1988, 1977, respectively. Princeton in the 3 spot, 15 chips. Again, their last chip, 1922. Way outside.
Yeah.
Alabama at number 2, 16 chips. And we kind of know their history because Saban, 7 chips, 6 of them with Alabama, right? From 9, 11, 12, 15, 17, and 20. And the number ones with the most chips in NCAA, Yale. But their last came in 1927. So
right.
Even when you look at that list of 10, and like you said, pointing out the AP poll, the time frame, this, that, and the other, 3 chips, great accomplishments. Really hard to get a chip, as we know. But it just doesn't come close to some of these programs and some of the more quote unquote historic runs that they've had.
Yep. Absolutely. And really, really good points there with that as well. When you just look at it from the title standpoint, as well as, in comparison to wins. So really, no matter how you cut it, right, it's good, not great, right? That's really what it comes down to. And that's the really important thing, I think, that we need to keep some perspective on, right? And it's not to say that we don't want Florida to be great. I want to get that across. I think we all want Florida to be great. We all want to win the title every year. I mean, we're fans, right? Of course we do. But at the end of the day, I think it's important that you have to keep expectations in a place that is reasonable, right? And it's not to say that I want us to win 7 games. That's not what I want. Though we'll have a conversation about that in a minute, because maybe next year, but we'll come back to that. But at the end of the day, I think what we're trying to say is winning 7 games is not always a terrible thing. And that's the thing. And I think to a lot of us now, and me included for the record, I'm not saying this like I'm some outsider who sees this differently. No, not at all. I mean, maybe after looking at this, I see it a little differently, but I didn't before that. I think a 7-5 season is like I'm not very happy with that. And for the record, I'm not happy with it now, right? I'm not like gonna go and have a party because we were 7-5. Of course not. However, I think it's important to take away what that might mean, especially in certain seasons and especially under certain sets of circumstances, which I think we've had quite a few of over the past, say, 20 years, right? There's plenty of times where a 7-5 season is probably not bad, right? And there's a reason why that's not bad. Now, again, I'm not saying to celebrate it. I don't want this to get construed. I'm not saying to celebrate basically mediocrity. I would never be a fan of that ever. But I think it's important to not be disgusted by it. That's the point that I think I'm trying to make here. Is there's a difference between celebrating it and just thinking that it's just that we might as well be 0-12. Right? And I think that's the difference, right? Is understanding that there is some good, some benefit, some positive takeaways from it, as opposed to, oh, it was just a wasted season and it doesn't mean anything. And that's the point I guess I would try to be make here.
Yeah. Well, no, so here's what I think I could boil it down to. You mentioned earlier about being a realist. We want to speak truth. We're fans, not want mediocrity at all. So I'll tell you what, we'll just call it the optimistic realist section. How about that?
There you go.
There's one thing for it. But here's the other thing too. When you look at the tenure of coaches, that obviously, I mean, when you look at Spurrier, when he took office, to be here for 11 seasons, that was a big deal. That created a lot of continuity. Of course, this past season, we talked a lot about continuity, that continued effort, the work ethic, the message, right? Having to sell players on this program, it's huge. Yep. The other thing that I think we still have to take into consideration, I don't know if many people might know this, B. I know we called it out twice last fall, but consecutive game scoring streak. Florida's at 437 consecutive games.
Yep.
Scoring a point. 437. The next closest school was surprising to me, and their streak. So the next closest school is TCU with 382 games consecutive scoring.
Wow. Yeah, I would not have guessed TCU.
Right? The third one on the list is Michigan with 365 games consecutive scoring. And number 4, our good friends out west, BYU, 361 games that they've scored in consecutively. So, having that been said, this is not a downing part. I agree with you. It's not a matter of, we're saying go back historically, we sucked. No, it's not about that. It's just
not at all.
Right, just taking that deeper dive into what this program looks like. And to be honest with you, more than anything else, just learned a lot about Florida football over the years.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. So to that point, on to our next little talking point here. And that is, what does success look like in the fall of 24? So we set the stage a little here, and there is a reason why. I won't say this was purely motivated by the standard of what was, but it was to a degree. In fairness, we really did want to take a look at that kind of in a vacuum. But then I also think it's important to say, okay, let's pull it out of that vacuum and let's take a look at what it means today, right, and what it means going forward into this next season. So I'll ask this question: factoring in the schedule, which we'll discuss as we already have a little bit, and the history of the program, which we just did discuss, what win total would define success for Napier and the team in 2024? Your thoughts?
That's a loaded question, dude.
Yeah, it is for sure.
It's an absolute loaded question, and it's such a tough question because as we saw, so look at last fall, look at our preseason show pod, and what did Vegas have it has?
They had us at 5 wins. Well, 5.5.
Yeah. 5, whatever. It's fine. But and I remember our reaction to that was just
Shock and awe was our reaction to it.
You got to be kidding me, right? You got to be absolutely kidding me. And so here's the other thing that's tough about that. We have definitely some new personnel coming in. There's going to be a big change up when it comes to the lineup, the roster. So be that as it may. The other thing that I don't think people are factoring in is the fact of, yeah, it's going to be a tough schedule, right? But I'm going to take a quick deep dive into the schedule.
You're gonna steal my thunder. Okay, go ahead.
Either way, I'll ping it back and forth.
No, you're good. You're good. I'm just kidding. Go for it.
But no, August 31st, Miami.
Yep.
Okay, at least that's at the Swamp. So be it.
Yep.
September 7th at Samford, quasi cupcake. I'm gonna say complete
cupcake. Home Sanford, but yes.
Yeah, home. September 14th, A&M. That's at home. Great.
Yep. Not at all a cupcake, but yes.
No, and, I'm sorry. What'd you call Texas A&M?
Florida West.
Yes.
Funny story about that. I ran into some A&M fans last week in Houston, and actually A&M alum, and I dropped that line on them, and they actually got a pretty good kick out of it. It was kind of funny.
Oh, they better have, because we're not talking about University of West Florida here. This is much different. So there's that. September 21st, Mississippi State in Starkville. We get to hear cowbells. Yay.
More cowbell.
More cowbell. Yeah. Are we having Christopher Walken come on here? No. October 5th. Yeah. October 5th, UCF in the Swamp. October 12th, at Tennessee in Knoxville. October 19th, Kentucky here in the Swamp.
And we'll stop you right there. So, okay, if that doesn't sound that bad yet, you're right. It's not. Like, that's not, I mean, it's not easy, certainly, but it's not horrific. Now, hold on to your hats. Go.
Exactly. November 2nd, Georgia in Jacksonville. November 9th, Texas Longhorns in Austin. November 16th, LSU back in the Swamp. November 23rd, Ole Miss. Lane's coming to town at the Swamp. November 30th, Florida State. We got to go to Tallahassee.
If that is not the hardest 5-game stretch in college football next year, I'll quit my day job. Period. There is no question that is the hardest stretch. At one point this season, every team there was ranked in the top 10. Period. I'm pretty sure at least 2 of them were number 1 or 2. No, I guess 1 or 3. 3 of them were 1 or 3 at one point this season. So, yeah. And again, it's not like the first 7 games are cake or something, right? There's losable games in there for sure. Miami to start. Let's start there, right? A&M certainly losable. At Mississippi State is not a laydown. I think we get that one, but still, UCF at home. Don't write off Malzahn, guys. I mean, I would be beside myself if we lost to him, but you can't write him off. He's a good manager in a big game. Tennessee with this freshman quarterback in that bowl game looked outstanding. I am not looking forward to playing that game in Knoxville. Kentucky at home, we better win it this year, or I may start the Fire Napier petition myself at that point. Because that one, as you know, is my pet peeve to lose, because I don't think we ever should, but we'll move along. But then from there, I mean, it's just murderer's row. I mean, we lost the last 5 games this year, and we're pretty upset about it because we should have gotten at least one, really probably 2, possibly 3. If we lost all 5 next year, I'd just kind of be like, okay. Like, I get it. Like, if we don't start 7-0, it's very possible we don't have a winning season. That's what we're looking at. I mean,
Yeah.
very, very possible. Getting a win in those last 5 games is going to be exceedingly difficult when you look at that schedule. I mean, those are all really good teams. I just saw where the Athletic picked LSU to go 12-0 in the regular schedule and 10-0 in conference, or
Whoa.
9-0 in conference. Sorry. Yeah.
Mm.
So they're picking them to be pretty good. Now, does that mean that they're going to do that? Of course not. But it means they're picking them to be a very good team, for what that's worth. So at least we get them at home, but they're going to be very good. So it's something to keep in mind for sure. Now, I'm not saying we can't win any of those games, but it's certainly a heck of a gauntlet. So, any other thoughts on that you were going to bring up? Well, you didn't answer the question yet. What's the win total for you? What does
Dang
it
it!
look
I thought you were. I thought you were just gonna just mosey on by. No.
like? No, you don't get off the hook that easy, sir.
Fine. Okay. All things again, optimistic realist, right? Okay, optimistic realist.
Yep.
Considering the things that we know, considering the changes that we know that are coming from a personnel standpoint, position standpoint, everything standpoint. Having that been said, and looking at this schedule, and if we are in much closer games, if we're competitive, and a couple other changes happen, especially on the defensive side of the football, I'll take us at 7-5, with the caveat bowl appearance, strong bowl appearance, with a bowl win to propel us into the fall of 25.
Yeah, and I think you'll probably get that, assuming that does happen, right? Because I think you have a lot of young players, likely not going to have a ton of opt-outs, right? I think you'd probably get the bowl win. It depends on the opponent, right? But for sure. But I think it's very likely this is not going to be an older team. Certainly, it's still going to be a much younger team. I think it's very likely Mertz probably playing in his last game, assuming no form of injury or any kind of weird changes to the quarterback position. And again, assuming your schedule there, I think it's very likely that you see us win that bowl game, assuming we get to it.
Yeah.
So I love your answer. I have the same. I have 7-5. And again, this is not what we're predicting. I want to clarify. We are not predicting 7-5. If I look at that schedule, it's very hard for me to predict 7-5, to be honest with you. I hope I can when we get to our season preview in August and we can go through it and I can have the faith to do that. But it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to pick 7. I'd love to be able to pick 8-4. I don't see it. But I mean, thankfully a couple of those games down the stretch are at home. So maybe that helps us a little bit. But it's going to be really hard to pick certainly better than 8-4. It's damn well near impossible to pick better than 8-4 down the stretch, or just in general, and not just feel like a complete homer with the picks. I mean, seriously, because that schedule is just absolutely brutal. Again, we said we're going to say it 1,000 times. It's fine. It's brutal. So I'm with you. 7-5 has to be defined as success. Now take a minute to wrap your head around that. 7-5 is a success. Not it's okay. No. It's success.
Context.
When you combine exactly context, when you combine that schedule and when you combine, again, I'm not going to leave it out, the history of this program, and it's not because it was at 7 wins for the record. That honestly has nothing to do with it. It's just the fact that we're not a program that is, consistently getting 10 and 11 win seasons every year. We aren't. It's not who we are. So when you look at that, and then you look at the Murderers Row that we're playing next year, you look at the fact that we are still a young team. I'm not using it as an excuse. It's just a fact. This team would have to be very good at what they're doing to go 7-5. Very good. Very good. Bordering on great to go 7-5 with that schedule. It's wild. It's wild to say that. It's wild to think that. But if you really look at it, that's the truth. I mean, there's really no That's not really up for debate. That's not really an opinion, I don't feel at all. That to me is pretty much fact when you look at all of the numbers as it relates to who this team is on paper, talent wise, right? On paper, schedule wise, you're going to have to do something very, very deviant from the mean to be able to do significantly better than that number. Maybe you can catch another game. Sure. Maybe. Maybe you can lose another game. Sure. Maybe. Those things are to me the kind of the standard deviance. 9-3 is way out there from the mean to me. Like it's almost inconceivable. 10-2 is virtually impossible next year. I want you to think about that. It's virtually impossible.
Mm-hmm.
That's
You're not wrong.
That's pretty wild. It's pretty wild. And I really don't think that we're seeing that out of any place of anything but a real hard look at the realities of what is going on with this team. I really think we're doing everything we can to try to take bias and opinion and anything but data out of the equation and just look at, okay, this is what we got, right? This is what it is. So this is why when we hear conversations about Napier getting let go if he doesn't tear it up next year, come on, that's not real. Like that's not possible. So if that's the case, then just fire him now. And for the record, I don't think Strickland's going to do that. I don't necessarily think that there are people behind the scenes, booster wise or anything else, that are going to do that. Now that is opinion. I don't know any of that, but I think that if they see improvement and if they see, results on the field that are positive in terms of development of the team and things of that nature. And for the record, I would want to see that too, right? It wouldn't just solely revolve around the record. We're having that discussion around the record for the purposes of this conversation, but at the end of the day, we would want to see more than just, okay, yeah, we got to 7-5, we're good, right? No, it does need to be more than that, right? That defense does have to get significantly better, like what we talked about, we think it can, right? The offense has to look very cleaned up and efficient, right? No procedural penalties of any significance or consequence, right? If we don't get an offensive coordinator, then we better execute to a T, right, with the personnel that we have. And if we do get one, then it better work, right? And for the record, that if is looking a little less day by day, but we'll get into that in another episode. So there are things that we want to see besides just a record. I don't want to make like that's the sole qualifier or something like that. However, I do think that if we get to 7-5 and if we look decent doing it, that ought to be enough in my book.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I just kind of was mulling over in my head was when you look at 7-5. For the record, I didn't think you were going to pick 7-5. I thought you were going to be at 6-6, to be honest.
I mean, I did debate on it, but I do think that with the games that are there, I think you have to find a way to win one of those in that last 5. I think you lose one of the opening 7. I don't know where it is, but I think we start the season pretty strong, and then you again, if we're successful. I'm not saying this is what happens, but I think you have one loss in there, kind of, I'm gonna call it unexpected, but Tennessee's tough on the road, right? That's a tough one. So maybe that's the one, right? That I can't say that I would like expect to win or whatever the case might be. And then from there, you just have to get one back. I mean, maybe it's Ole Miss at home. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe Ole Miss doesn't deliver on how great they're theoretically going to be next year with this transfer class they brought in and everything else. Who knows? And if our defense is as sound as we think they might be, maybe Lane's offense doesn't. So
maybe to that point, I figured on the defensive side of the football, for what it's worth, the way to make this happen is, first, we've got to give up 50 to 75 yards less than what we gave up last fall. 50 to 75 yards. Anything more than that would be a miraculous improvement. But I'm calling for at least 50 to 75 in that range right now. Average per game yardage.
And what did we end with? We ended with just over 400 a game. Is that right?
I want to say we're somewhere in the 413, 414, 417 in that range.
Yeah, right? that sounds correct. Based just going from memory.
Yeah. The other thing is takeaways. We had some great interceptions when they happened, but not nearly enough to be
not nearly enough.
Right. Not nearly enough to make opposing quarterbacks flex about throwing the ball, not nearly as good in coverage to tip and bat the ball. So I think takeaways are going to be huge on the defensive side of the football to make that 7-5 happen, and then go for the miraculous stretch to go to 8-4. The other thing that has to happen on the I'm going to say the offensive side of football now is third down. We got to get better at third down, period.
Yep.
Period.
Agreed.
Right? Bottom of the list in the SEC, third down conversions. If we can take that third down conversion percentage, okay, it was at about 31%, so call it a third. If we can take that sucker and get that sucker up just to maybe 40, 42, 45%, that's going to be huge to move that football down the field.
Yeah, and that's where – oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good.
I was just going to say that's where I think an OC would make a big difference, because I think the problem with that situation is, and the reason we weren't better on third down is Billy in third and short is fine, good even, but third and medium to third and long, right? He's very predictable. We talked about this, right? And unfortunately, he's somewhat predictable, even at least at times, not always, but at times, in how he gets himself into third and medium and third and long, right? Just some of the things that he does as the game goes along. He's not necessarily like this the whole game or the entire game or even at sections of the game, but there are drives where it's like you just know it's coming, right? Mm-hmm. You know the plays that are going to come, and so does the opposing coaches, and then all of a sudden you're in third and long, and when he's in third and long, we almost, depending on where he is on the field, we know what he's going to do, right? If he's in third and long inside his own 40, he's running the football. 100% of the time, he is running the football because he's going to go for it on fourth down. So he thinks he can get some yards he's going to surprise them, except 100% of the time he's going to run it. So he's not surprising anybody, but he's going to run the football. We've talked about this, right? And it's so predictable that he's going to do that it's not at all a surprise, and you don't get yards, and then you're in fourth and long, and then you're not going for it, or maybe you're in 4th and 4 and you are, and then what's your percentage that you're going to get it? So to your point, I think that's where I really think an OC would help us with that particular number, third down conversion. Maybe the other stats aren't even significantly impacted that much, right? Maybe a few, but for the most part, I don't see like the offense getting like, oh my God, it's so much better, right? I don't think our offense is bad. I just think there are weak spots. And one of those is some of the predictability that I see in certain situations, which in particular with third down has been a problem. And to your point, so sorry, I didn't mean to get off on a tangent there, but that's one thing that really stuck out to me last season, because it was the second season that I saw the same things, right? So,
yeah. And I think one good call out there is what an OC brings is not just a play calling ability, it is the timing within the play calling ability, which I believe is going to help out another thing that I think needs to improve on offense, and that is points scored per game.
Yep, that absolutely has to get better.
Right. If we can raise that point scored average by another 5 or 6 per game,
at least,
because we're at sub 30.
I want 10.
That's fun. Right, at least 5. Okay, yeah, 5 to 10, sure.
I want 10. I mean, they're the best teams in the country. Not even the best teams. The teams that compete for things in the country are over 40 a game. So us going to 36, I mean, there's no reason. Again, we don't expect to compete for that, but I mean, I want 10. I want 35, 36 points a game. Period.
Yep. Yeah. And that's going to be a great number to be able to compete and be in those higher contestable shootouts, if
Yep.
you want to call that. I know it's not the Pac-12, whatever. Um, but when you are playing an LSU, when you are playing an Ole Miss, and Kiffin likes to do what he likes to run up the score, whatever the case might be. So that's going to be unique. And then on the special team side, we just need to continue that there. However, in net punting, we did finish pretty top in the season last year
Yep.
throughout FBS. But when you look at what we did from a net standpoint, especially in regards to pinning teams back, if we can just get inside the 20, that would be great. And then from a field goal kicking standpoint, um, you know what? Trey hopefully is going to come back, have a great junior season. If he can go north of 88% or north
Ooh,
on the year, he's going to
you're
be good.
calling for big. You're calling for big numbers. Okay, I still take 85, but all right, all right.
Yeah, yeah, I'll say
We
88.
can get into more about those specifics that you want in the season preview, but I hear you, and points taken. I mean, the you're right
Yeah,
though.
yeah.
A successful season is about more than a record for sure, though, and that is kind of the point I think you're trying to make. But I think for purposes of this, it is interesting and good. I think that we're on the same page there, and that 7-5 is really like we need to think of that as being good next year because it is, right? 7-5 next year is good. Again, I'm not having parties, but we need to accept that that's a successful season and we did a good job. Like we need to go home and say, okay, this is something to build on and nothing that we need to roll the visor down and stomp on it for, right? So that's important. So all right, with that, let's move it on and talk about this final topic point we have here, which is why does a current high school recruit or transfer come to play football at Florida today? We've had quite a few do so in the recent weeks here, which is very nice. We'll get into that another episode, but we have some kind of talking points that we want to get into here and just have some discussion around into why we feel like there's a part of this or could be parts of this. So, and this goes back to kind of the identity of the team or of the program overall. So we'll start off with this one, and I'll kind of get us started here. Is fun part of the identity, right? Because I think that matters, right? I mean, these are college kids, right? They want to have fun, right? Is fun part of the identity of this program, whether it's from a football standpoint, a campus life standpoint, right? Because these things factor in. Um, I think my answer to this is yes. Based on the reviews that you hear, right, of these kids that come for visits, whether they commit or not, everybody's review of Florida is like super positive right now for whatever the reasons might be. They don't get into all the specifics, obviously, probably because there's some stuff they can't talk about. Just kidding. But but
Really?
I think but I think honestly that whether it's the experience on campus, off campus, football related, not football related, all the things Napier's doing to build out the culture of the entire program, the entire experience, really, right? I think based on that feedback that we're hearing, this answer has to be yes, right? It's just a question of to what degree, because at the end of the day, the one thing that is the most fun if you're a competitive athlete is winning. And that is the one component that we don't necessarily have in spades right now, right? No questions about it. And so that is the one piece that is still kind of the missing component here, but I kind of feel like we have all the other bases covered. So it kind of feels like if you can slot that in, man, okay, this thing could really kick. You know what I mean? From a fun standpoint, right? And I don't mean that like irresponsible fun, for the record. Like I mean like things that should be going on from like a fun standpoint, just so I'm clear. I'm not trying to get into all the other after hours type fun, but
Extracurricular. Yeah.
yeah, extracurricular, thank you, that's a perfect word. But I think based on what I'm seeing, my answer to this would be yes, even without the winning component necessarily being there right now. I think the answer is still yes. Again, it's to a degree because that piece isn't there yet. But if it comes, then I think this is like almost becoming a home run based on everything that I'm hearing. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I dig it. I dig it. I would have to say yes, purely for the fact of now. Here's the thing. I don't know if you remember this or not, but back when you and I were thinking about going to college, a few moons ago, I actually went down and
Just a
toured.
couple.
Yeah, just a couple. Toured Miami and Coral Gables and that area. And at the time, I want to say it was like a 209-acre campus. There was a man-made beach in the middle. I mean, it was beautiful. Campus was spotless. I'm like, wow, this is a college campus. So, anyways, I say that to say, I'm going to take Graham's quote here. Graham has said this multiple times. It's the most fun he's had playing football. You can't
Yep.
beat the weather. So I get it's a swamp, it's hot, but at the end of the day, you know what? You never have to shovel sunshine. Okay, especially coming from the north. So you're playing in a really fun environment. Okay. The other thing is you had an offense in the 90s. Fun was in the name. It was fun and gun.
Yeah.
Okay. It was fun and gun. Bottom line. The other thing that I look at is Billy and what he does to develop the players. We'll talk about that in a second. But one thing I love that he did at the beginning of the season in spring practice and moving forward, he actually had an improv show. And that improv show this past fall, this past summer, had a lot of players who would get the opportunity to impersonate him, the coaching staff, different other players on the team,
Nice.
and kind of act out different isms that they would have. Pretty cool.
Hmm.
So I definitely do think that, and especially if Graham said, and because of the amount of times he said it, and because of the look that he has and the genuineness in his face, I don't think it's smoke. So based off of that, if Graham and DJ are going to get as close as they're going to get, they've already had multiple meetings and dinners and thought meetings and brainstorming sessions. That's just going to rub off onto Mr. Lagway. Then absolutely yes and yes, and keep riding it.
I like it. I like it. All right, next question, and I'll let you go this one first. Does the swamp factor in for players in this decision?
Has to. Has to. I mean, I get the big house. I get the idea of playing out west. You have the Rose Bowl out there, different things like that. But when you look at other iconic stadium, Penn State, they seat a lot of people. The big house, they seat a lot of people. No problem. Neyland, seat a lot of people, right? But outside of that, it's such an iconic venue when you look at the swamp as again, old ball coach coined it back in the day. It's a bowl. It's a very steep bowl. When you stand on that field and you look up and you look at the top section, it's a steep climb. I've done mountain climbers in the swamp, and back in my younger days, it's not easy. When you do stadiums up there, it's just not easy. So it has to be a factor when you look at the history that's on that field and everything that came to be Ben Hill. It's actually, I know Ben Hill's going to be going through some construction, some overhaul. Maybe there's some seats that are coming out, more chairbacks. I know people are bummed about that, but it's not going anywhere. It's a historic venue. It can't be torn down.
Yep.
So for some of those reasons, I would say it's absolutely a factor because, last count, what is it, 88,540 something?
Something like
That
that. But I
place,
mean, I've seen it in 92, so whatever that means.
right? That place gets loud. That place gets rocking. And if it's one thing that I've enjoyed, all the recruits say is that just the atmosphere, especially when you look
Yep.
at what happens at the third quarter, between
Yep.
the third and the fourth quarter, the lights go out, Tom Petty's blaring. Quite the venue. Quite the venue.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say is based on the player feedback, right? Because we try to, base this off not just our opinions, of course, right, but some form of outside data, and based on player feedback, I think the answer has to be yes as well, right? And again, it's a question of to what degree that matters to them, but I think that when they go in and they experience that, there's been a lot of feedback about, man, this is quite the environment, right? This is quite the experience to be here and see what this looks like and what this feels like and what it's like to be in this particular stadium, because it does feel different, right? It isn't the same as even some of the other very historic SEC venues, right? So history aside, just the kind of the experience it is to be in the Swamp is somewhat unique for sure. Regardless of capacity, regardless of anything else, the way, to your point, the way it's shaped, the way that the actual construction of the structure itself is done. I think that really creates a very unique environment on the field, um, that is not easily duplicated anywhere else. So it's a pretty cool thing, and I hope, to your point, that these renovations don't change that too much. I think everybody hopes that.
Yeah.
And yes, of course, seating capacity is a concern there, but at the end of the day, you got to do what you got to do. I don't argue that a reno is needed. I think the place is pretty dated, and it really probably does need to be updated. And when you do that, you've got to make the changes that are compliant, and it is what it is, right? So how do you work around that? How do you best make that work? And I think we'll come up with a solution that is hopefully decent across the board. But that's a whole other conversation. The question is, does it factor in? And I think right now the answer is yes. So next question. Is winning still a part of our identity as a program? This is a tough one for me. I'm kind of half in, half out on this. And this is what I'll say. So if I look at it and I think back, we already talked about this, right? When were our, winningest teams, right? Well, consistently winningest teams were the 90s and the late 2000s. So late 2000s being the most recent, the kids that we're recruiting were what? 5, 4, 3, not born, depending on when you start.
Not born. Yeah.
So, I'm really not sure that for those guys it is. However, there is a thought that I keep hearing, right? A theme that I keep hearing. And in fairness, I think the coaching staff's done a really good job of promoting this and kind of getting this in their head. And there was a theme of this a few years back too. I think this kind of came up under McElwain, actually. And not saying that this was his doing, but this theme has really come out with the players. And I think in this case, it's very much because of the coaching staff and how they're recruiting, is bring Florida back to prominence, back to greatness, whatever. And again, I would argue, okay, bringing back to greatness of a certain few years, but nonetheless, there was greatness there, no question. And this concept of bringing Florida back to that does imply a knowledge of what we were or have been at times. And that does imply that it is still a piece of the identity, for sure. So there's a part of me that's like, okay, these kids don't know about that, so no. But then there's another part of me that says, okay, well, they're talking about it, so yes. So I'm really split on this one. I'm like right down the middle to say I don't know if it is or if it isn't. I would hope that it is, but that's just me hoping as a fan and great lover of Florida football. But really to put any kind of solid data behind that, I don't know that I can, because obviously there hasn't been consistent winning in coming up on really 15 years now, not consistent winning, right? So it's tough. It's tough. What are your thoughts on that one?
My answer, believe it or not, was no.
I believe it. I believe it.
And yeah, and so just like you, I did the math, right? I said, okay, we're recruiting guys right now that have committed, right? Let's just say they're 18 years old, right? I'm not that good at math, but that'll put them born in roughly 2005, 2004, 2006.
Yep.
Based off of that, they're watching with dad or siblings or family, mom, whoever, and let's just say they start getting into football, watching the Gators, watching the orange and blue because families die hard or whatever the case might be, and they start watching it, say around 10 years old. At 10 years old, that puts us at 2013. Right, 2013 was the end of, close to the end of Will Muschamp's tenure.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
In 13, we went 7-6. In and so in 14 we went 8-5. Okay. Sorry,
Yep.
sorry, sorry. Yep. 4-8. Sorry. Uh,
4-8. Oh, yeah, that
4-8.
was
Right.
that rough
Seven,
year. I
seven
knew
and
that was in
five.
there somewhere.
Right. And then Jim McElwain comes in 2015. We're at 10-4. SEC East champs. Okay, whatever. Right. Then after that, Jim would get 9-4, but then 4-7.
Yeah.
And then hey, our great OC comes back, Mullen, 10-3, 11-2, then 8-4, then 6-7, then tyranny after LSU, and then of course 6-6. Of course, the loss in the bowl game, 6-7, 6-6, 6-7, 5-7. And so when I look at that and what a lot of players look to, it's probably mainly off the efforts and suggestions or memories or recall of family and people around him. Just when they did this, when Emmett did this, when Florida Field was turf and Spurs said nope, we're pulling that right now, and we're going to put grass on there. And Werfel and Doring and Quezzy and Hilliard and all those guys that paved the way for Sexy Rexy, Gaffney. You had another string of those guys, and it's like those players wouldn't have known. These players today, to your point, no clue.
Yep.
No,
No clue
no
about
clue.
any of that. Yep.
Right? It's almost like a bride on her wedding, something borrowed, old, blue, or whatever, old,
And
new,
new, I
borrowed, and
think.
blue.
Yep.
Yeah, there you go. All the stuff, all the knowledge they have is nothing more than what they saw family wear, and the apparel and the colors and the passion that came with that.
Yeah. No, I hear you. Yeah, I'm with you. And it's very easy for me to, again, if it weren't for all this talk about bringing it back and what I think the coaches are trying to do, and some of the history that Napier tries to instill in players that do come there, right? If it weren't for all that and what I think importance he places on it, I probably wouldn't even be on the fence about this. For the record, I'd be right there with you. I think Napier is trying to do a good job of bringing some of that history in, and maybe that's helping a little, but I don't know. That's purely speculation, honestly. So,
Sure.
all right, next question. Do academics factor in?
Yeah, it's got to, right? Well, here, I'll tell you what. Let me take a step back. University of Florida this past year, 2023, named #1 public institution. Fine, good. I'll tell you what. I am going to quote one of our newest commits for the class of 2025. Gator Nation, you all might know the name Jalen Wiggins. That name might ring a bell. Top 100 commit. He already committed to class of 2025. He's out of James Rickards in Tallahassee, 4-star. He was recently quoted saying that University of Florida, #1 public school in the nation, they have amazing opportunities off the football field, especially when you look at what they do in the field of engineering, medicine, dentistry. The other thing that he likes, he did mention, after football practice, this, that, and the other, getting to know his day, he likes to study late at night. He likes to do schoolwork late at night. And the amazing thing that he was told by the staff that he has access to is tutoring help available late in the evenings. And so those opportunities alone, as I look at what these players are coached to do inside the lines, I enjoy the fact that the University of Florida is not shying away as far as what they're offering from that academic perspective. So that's going to be huge. And not to mention, take it a step further with Gator Made. It's not technically academic, but I tell you what, it's helping round off the athlete between academic and athlete, because what Gator Made is doing with these young men, again, brothers, fathers, future leaders, all that mess, it's helping them be not just an athlete, but well-rounded in the sense of the world, business, environment, everything that they're going to be faced with in the future. And they, as in the staff, are doing their best to equip them and give them those tools to be able to succeed outside the white lines of that football field. So, do academics factor in? Unequivocally, yes.
So I don't know about unequivocally. I'm going to debate you there. I think case by case basis, yes. Depending on the student athlete, yes. Right. So for Mr. Wiggins, right, probably for Joey Slackman, though he hasn't stated it, I think absolutely. Right. For the players that it does factor in for, it matters. Where we are and where we stand and where we rank and the school that we are academically, absolutely. So for those students, athletes that it matters, the academics of the school in general, the fact that we are so strong matters, right? Then it factors in. For the students where that's not necessarily their priority, and I don't mean that in any way that it doesn't matter to them at all, but where it doesn't rank as highly on their list, I just don't think it plays that big a role. I just don't. Because if this was something that mattered to the majority of student athletes, I frankly think we'd get a lot more commits than we did.
Oh.
That's how I'd break it down. I think if it really mattered that much, then we would be much higher on the list, because being the #1 public university in the country is a big deal when you combine it with the athletic programs that we're offering. I mean, that's a very rare combination when you look at it, to me, right? You're talking about the #1 public school in the country. There are very few universities in total that rank above you academically, right? There's a short list that's above you in total, right? What, few dozen schools tops, and probably not even that many. And all of those, what do those football programs look like? Well, I guess ask Joey Slackman what Penn's football program looks like. Because I'm sure Penn ranks above us academically because it's an Ivy League school, right? So I would think, I don't know that for the record, but it's a private Ivy League school, so I would assume. So when you combine that level of education with a football program at as high a level as ours is, which is quite high on the spectrum overall, certainly when you compare it to every other school, right? That's a rare combination. So if academics matter to every player, say equally, I think we would we'd be fighting kids off with a stick, quite frankly. And that's just the way I feel about it. And I just don't think it does. Not to that degree. I think they feel they can get an adequate education at most places they go, that it will, get them a college degree, which is really what they're looking for, if they're not thinking that, life beyond college football in a football world, right? Pro level, obviously, is what I'm referring to, is possible. They feel like that's going to get them what they need, and they'll be fine. And I'm generalizing, of course, and I don't know all this, but at the end of the day, that's just my feeling, because if it really mattered that much, then we would have to rank way up there for a lot more kids. We just would. And I don't see that. I think depending on the recruit, absolutely. But overall, yeah, not so much. I don't see that as being an overall driving factor. All right, last question. Where do coaching and development and the consistency of that coaching and development factor in to a recruit's decision? Now, we're speaking specifically about a quote that actually came out, I think, today, or actually, I guess it came out before, but it was referenced today in an article that we both were looking at, from our new acquisition, if you will, from the portal, though we really probably should have got him in recruiting, but we didn't. And these are some things that he said back in December when he didn't commit here, and that is Mr. Grimsley, our newly committed quarterback. Welcome. Do you have that quote handy? You want to read it?
I do.
Fire away. talk about what he said back in December as to why he basically wasn't coming then, though really what it boiled down to was he wanted to go play for Nick Saban. But that didn't happen.
Yeah.
But this is what he said then. So go ahead, Randy.
Yeah, this is the strongest part of that statement. With Florida, I mean, I know that they don't give time for coaches to try to build a program. Dudes get fired for winning 10 games, so you've got to start winning fast. That's the only thing I question a little bit about Florida is the stability. End quote.
Really interesting stuff. Your thoughts?
Yeah, man. Talk about an indictment.
Yeah, for real. But also how interestingly perceptive.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing. Here's a guy who, and for the record, because of his position, again, the main reason he said he wanted to go play for Saban was because Saban coaches the defense, more specifically the DBs. And so at his position, he wanted to go, although Gator fan, sure, yep, growing up, this, that, and the other. He wanted to go where he felt like he was going to have the greatest chance of success in his position, getting better in his position to, of course, prepare him for his next stage, which would, of course, undoubtedly be the NFL.
Yep. Absolutely. And to your point, it's interesting seeing his quote now that he has transferred and committed to us. He said, quote, now I get to play for my dream school.
Mm-hmm.
So ironically, he really wanted to come here from a school standpoint, but felt that the best decision for him was to go because he, I think, grew up a Gator fan, I believe. And
Right.
but I think he decided he should go to Alabama for the betterment of his development because he felt the best coaching was there for him because he'd get to go play for, you know, the man, the myth, the legend, if you will, right? Which, I mean, I get it. Hey, you know, all ill will aside, to Saban, he's a hell of a coach, right? I mean, he just is.
I thought
So,
you were going to say Dark Sith Lord. I'm sorry. I
well,
think
it's
that was just between
you know,
us.
we can go down that road too. But at the end of the day, like it is really interesting, right? Because this also goes back to the concept of all these players that are going certain places for coaches, right? I mean, if you don't think that we lost Phil Simi because we lost Corey Raymond and probably a bag of money, um, but a combination of those two, then I think you're naive. That Corey Raymond firing affected Phil Simi's recruitment 100%. It had an impact. He tweeted almost immediately when Raymond was fired. What the hell? Put it on his Twitter account, almost, you know, or his X account, whatever, almost instantly. It upset him. He did not, he felt like he wanted to go play for Corey Raymond, which is kind of ironic because Corey Raymond doesn't really coach the safeties, but that's a whole other conversation. At the end of the day, Corey Raymond was heavily involved in his recruitment. He
Yep.
felt like that was the guy he wanted to go to Florida for, and then he wasn't there. And that impacted him. So coaches matter. So this concept of coaches or coaching and development at a school, it might be the biggest factor on this whole list, if we're really being honest. And when we look at it from a consistency standpoint, this is what's really interesting. Quick question for those that may not know. Since Steve Spurrier, how many coaches have been at Florida for more than 4 years? The answer is 1. It was Urban Meyer.
Mm-hmm.
And he obviously could have stayed as long as he wanted. He could still be here today if he wanted to be, because when you win 2 national titles for a school, they don't fire you.
No.
But obviously, we know what happened, and he walked away for whatever his reasons, health or otherwise,
Yep.
or health in quotes. But
Yep.
but at the end of the day, he's no longer here, and the number of coaches that we have had that have done more than 4 years, other than him, since Spurrier, are exactly 0. So Jameer's got a point. I give it to the kid. Super perceptive comment. He doesn't know how long the coach he's going to go play for is going to last, because if he's not in his first year, he ain't got no guarantee that he's going to play for him all 4.
Mm-hmm.
The heck of a point, man. It's a heck of a point. Now, I would make the argument that there are many other universities that are in that same boat. We are not alone there,
Oh, yeah.
right? But if you look at the best programs, the most consistent programs, the programs that win the most over time, programs that win the most titles, in a lot of cases, not all, but that win the most conference titles, maybe, those schools don't have that kind of turnover. Not in recent years, anyway. Now, obviously, that's because they've found a good coach that they're happy with, they're sticking with, who is winning. I understand that. I get that to a degree is common knowledge, common logic, whatever. The one exception I would kind of make to that, though, would actually be Michigan. And I don't want to get into a whole big deal about this, but when you look at it, and at the end of the day, Michigan kind of was the exception to that, because Harbaugh didn't start off especially great at Michigan, right? He did fine, but he kept not beating Ohio State over and over and over again, kept not winning the Big Ten over and over and over again, kept not making the national title game or the playoff, depending on the year we were talking about, over and over and over again. And then all of a sudden, he did all of those things over and over and over again. Well, maybe not over and over and over again, but 3 years in a row beating Ohio State, 2 years in a row making the playoff. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. And then, of course, we know how this year ended. Now, I would argue this year's a little fluky for him to actually win the thing, but that's neither here nor there. When you boil it all down, interesting that a consistency at coach made a difference there. Now, it's also interesting that his recruiting is pretty much status quo every year and right about 15th or 16th. But that's another conversation. I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, from a culture standpoint, from a player buy-in standpoint, I do think these things matter. And I've been encouraged to hear Scott Strickland's comments recently in the backing that he has for Napier, no matter where that motivation is based, because some people say that it's based because he thinks his wagon's tied to Napier or whatever the case may be. But again, you and I have talked about this. I think Scott's way too genuine a guy to have that be the motivation behind saying something of that, whether his wagon is tied or not. I think Scott believes that. I think he believes in Napier, and I'm interested to see where it goes. So I'm hopeful that we do get some consistency, as long as it doesn't mean that we're headed in the wrong direction from a consistency standpoint. And for the record, I'm not convinced we are yet. Next year will help elaborate that for me.
Yeah.
So any other thoughts on that from a coaching and development standpoint?
I think the other thing to point out about this specifically, Grimsley, is, so we had a great relationship with Raymond. Arguably so. Raymond does really good with player development, building that relationship. I've heard a lot of people mention that when Corey Raymond talks to a potential recruit, I mean, locked in. It's almost like your best friends. He has such a warm spirit about him, and that's awesome. But when you look at the timing of it all, so Raymond went back to LSU, right? Okay.
Yeah.
When you look at what happened, and this is why I love what I believe it's On3B. You could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think On3 pointed this out. But okay, Nick, Coach Saban, the Dark Sith Lord, whatever, GOAT, calls it quits. Okay, really interesting turn of events, because that whole day he had meetings, he was talking to recruits, he was going through all the different positions, deficiencies, this and that and the other. And he didn't make that announcement until very late in the evening, right? So he was going to address the team, and he's on the phone with his wife, and that whatever they talked about. And he said, boy, the way I address the team is going to go one of two ways, and both ways changes a lot, affects a lot of lives forever. That happens. We know it happened after 5 p.m. Fine. Then the next day this happens, and really and truly, Raymond had the opportunity to reconnect with Grimsley. And for all intents and purposes, Grimsley could be at LSU right now because of Raymond. But for whatever reason, Will Harris showed up, and Will Harris just happened to reconnect with Grimsley the morning after, right? And there was familiarity there, and he pursued it real hard, real hard. And so I love what my point is. I love what On3 said regarding the whistle. You recruit to the whistle because it's almost like a sales job.
Yep.
It's almost like a sales job. You fill your funnel. You've got prospects. You're filling the funnel, filling the funnel, filling the funnel, filling the funnel. But at the end of the day, we just don't know who's going to buy it. We have a great chance with some. We have a great opportunity. But which sales are we actually going to close? At the end of the day, I just have to fill my funnel as much as I can. And again, recruit to the whistle, play to the whistle. We did that. Got a great talent as a result of it. So kudos to them for that.
And want to point out that Raymond did re-pursue him. Maybe not as quickly as Harris did, but he did, because that decision was down to LSU and us for him, and he picked us. So love getting that win in that situation, because Raymond is still a tough beat as far as recruiting goes. No question about it. As you mentioned, he's still very good at it. There's no two ways about it. So yeah, love it. Good stuff. All right. So with that, I think that kind of closes us out here. Any final thoughts in all of this? Do you want to wrap in here before we sign off?
Yeah, no, all good things, man. Couple of realizations, couple of ahas regarding Florida football history, prominence, dominance, things like that, lack thereof. But, especially for that 15, 16 year time period, which was really unique, that I think really defines the program. That was unique going through those things. But outside of that, also another unique perspective on the wins, right? Broken down the 7 wins.
Yeah.
The 9 wins, the difference between
the 6 wins without Spurrier, right?
yeah, pretty much. So,
or without Spurrier and beyond, I guess I should say, in fairness, not just Spurrier, but
fair. So that was unique to unpack that and kind of figure out what is truly this identity in this team, right? And I think we'll have to coin. We don't have houndstooth. We have a visor. I think that's going to be pretty good moving forward. but outside of that, no, really good to unpack, man. And I look forward to the next one in 2 weeks' time.
Yep, absolutely. 2 weeks. We're going to kind of go through. We're going to take a look at kind of where we think the roster's at and the changes to the team, whether it be coaching wise, roster wise, and just kind of take a look at whether or not we think we're kind of plus or minus from where we were last year. Different position groups, different coaching, changes that have been made. Could possibly be some more, as we discussed. Not sure if that's going to happen, but certainly the ones we've seen already. And we want to have a discussion around that. So that's what we're going to do in a couple of weeks from tonight. So with that, I think I'm with you. Same thing, really enlightening to kind of look through and kind of look at all that stuff and really examine it in detail. Hope it's been enlightening for anybody who's listening and kind of to deep dive into that stuff and get a little perspective. I think perspective is always good, because perception is reality, right? And perspective helps create perception, right? That's a little proverb, little Confucius say, right?
Yeah, what are you, a philosophizer?
Something like that. But no, with that, we'll close this thing out and say wherever you are and whenever you may be listening, thanks for taking the time, and we'll see you around, Gator Nation.